Hello and welcome to the Beyond Biotech podcast number 104. I'm Jim Cornell and this is the weekly podcast from Labiotech. This week we're talking about cutting through the hype of AI in drug discovery. Or is it hype? How are AI and machine learning improving medicine? And are there still areas where AI needs to evolve? It's definitely a fascinating subject, and one company at the forefront of using AI in drug development is LabGenius, which is developing next-generation therapeutic antibodies. Its discovery platform integrates AI, robotic automation, and synthetic biology. And so on the podcast today, we have a conversation on the role of AI in drug discovery with Dr. James Field, founder and CEO of LabGenius. All right, so to get things started, could you give us a bit of background information on the company?
LabGenius, we're a London-based antibody discovery company, and really what we're doing is pioneering the discovery of complex therapeutic antibodies. And the way in which we're doing that is we use both machine learning and high-throughput experimentation. And maybe just to take a step back and think about why is it that we even need to start combining these sort of technologies? Isn't antibody discovery good enough? Well, one of the trends that we've been aware of and we can see happening is that antibody therapeutics are becoming more and more complex. We're stitching together more and more different binding domains to try and get molecules really with quite now sophisticated functionality. It may be the case that we're going well beyond the days where you just want a simple cytokine antagonist. And so what we see with a lot of the molecules that are perhaps the most exciting in pipelines today is that they go well beyond just binding in terms of their function. These molecules have to be able to agonize multiple different pathways simultaneously, bring cells together, really have quite complex mechanisms of action. And when you're trying to work with these complex antibodies, the big challenge that you face is the link between how those molecules are designed and how they function is non-intuitive. So this is an approach that we're taking that allows us to grapple with that complexity and find better molecules faster.
You just raised £35 million. I wonder if you could tell me about the machine learning driven drug discovery platform and the pipeline of multi-specific antibodies that you have.
Yeah, absolutely. So the business recently closed this, as you say, £35 million round. That was led by M Ventures, which is Merck's venture arm, and also we had sort of participation from some other really great investors like Octopus, LG Corp, Kindred, Lux, Obvious, Atomico, and others. And really, what this financing allows us to do is to both double down on our platform, and I'll talk more about that in a second, but also prosecute against our own pipeline of multi-specific antibodies. So maybe just sort of focusing first on the pipeline, and then I'll talk a little bit about the platform. So again, what we're really interested in are these complex therapeutic antibodies where the link between how they're designed and how they function is really quite complex. And that's where this approach lends itself really nicely to multi-specific antibodies, because, as I said, with that class of molecule, you're often having to engage with multiple different receptors simultaneously. You're having to bring cells together. And again, the underlying mechanisms of action are really, really quite complex. And when you're trying to design these molecules, again, the link between how they're designed and how they function is really quite complex. I can sit down as an experienced protein engineer and try and design them, but actually when I test them, and I test them in the context of these disease-relevant cell-based assays, they may or may not work as I intended. So they're challenging molecules. Conventional methods for antibody discovery don't really work well with them. And the reason for that is because the high-performing molecules are intrinsically rare. And you have to be able to characterize these complex multispecifics in disease-relevant cell-based assays. And the really big challenge with that is those disease-relevant cell-based assays are intrinsically quite low throughput. So we've got a molecule that's inherently very rare and a low throughput way of testing them in the lab. So really what machine learning enables us to do is to massively open up the design space that we can explore. And the platform that we've built enables us to do that. And so if you were to come around the LabGenius facility in London, what you would see is a room full of liquid handling robots working very hard, conducting experiments. And those experiments are all designed algorithmically. So what we do is we set out a very large area of design space. Maybe it's, 300,000 antibody designs, maybe 500,000, 1 million, something like that. And then we use the high throughput experimentation to subsample that really large area of design space. We generate really rich disease relevant cell-based data, running these cell-based assays at very high throughput with the automation. And then that's the data that we use to train models that predict how molecules from the unseen portion of the design space will function. This, for me, is one of the really most interesting applications of machine learning, because it's using this computational method to really expand the number of designs that you can evaluate beyond what's possible through robotic automation.
When it comes to machine learning, and I guess the associated terms, artificial intelligence, LLM, does that create some kind of confusion or nervousness in some people insofar as they know what the terms are, but not necessarily their usage and how they work?
Yeah, so these terms, as you say, AI, ML, LLMs, generative AI, etc., they kind of catalyze whole different reactions in different groups of people. So, maybe they make you feel excited about the potential of the technology. Maybe you're like, oh, I've heard this so many times. What does it actually mean? And maybe you feel, oh my goodness, is my job at risk? I think the broad trend here is, over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen a real acceleration in the pace at which biology is being digitized. Now, as we've gone from recording information with pens and paper and storing information in really basic formats, we now have a lot of rich, structured information that we can generate very quickly. And once you have that, that becomes a very interesting substrate for machine learning and the associated technologies. So we're seeing this across the whole of not only life sciences, but really every facet of life, where now we've got all of this data, we can learn all of these interesting relationships. And I think something that one should bear in mind is that this is definitely going to transform everything. But equally, there are tons of different use cases that are massively overhyped and applications that probably won't amount to anything. And so I think the challenge that we all face, whether it's in daily life or within the context of the life sciences, is how do you really cut through that noise to work out what are the things that are really going to move the needle and what are the things that won't amount to anything. And for me, this really kind of comes down to what is the biological problem that you're looking to solve? And the reason that that's such an important question to answer is because a lot of these methodologies are really data hungry. And if it's the case that in biology you can generate enough data to train a model, often it's the case that by generating the data, you've solved the problem itself. And so there's that tension there where for some applications, folks are out there trying to generate a lot of data, but actually just by generating the data, you can solve the problem. So I think we really need to be thoughtful around exactly where and how we deploy these different technologies, because, as I say, some have the potential to unlock tremendous value, but others, probably it would be the case that a conventional approach might actually make more sense.
I guess there are some people that are worried that it's going to take over the world, get rid of every job on the face of the earth. But clearly, it all depends, I guess, on the sector that you're talking about. Clearly, in the biological sciences, there are more positives than negatives.
I think that's exactly right. And the thing that I'm most excited about is where these types of technology can really overcome some of the limitations and challenges that we face today. I am a trained professional protein engineer, but I will be the first to admit that humans are terrible at protein engineering. We have not evolved to look at molecules at the nanoscale and have an intuition about how these things work and how changing atoms or residues on them are going to impact performance. This is something that we're all sort of uniquely bad at. So you could take the very best, most talented human protein engineer, and they're still objectively rubbish. Not by fault of their own, just by fault of the fact that our survival as a species has never really depended on being able to engineer these molecules. I mean, that is the perfect application space for a technology like machine learning, where you have to really deeply understand the interaction of all of these different biological parts simultaneously in this high dimensional space. That is a really a great application for machine learning to overcome that limitation that we all have in engineering these molecules, and the potential that that has to unlock with respect to helping us for these really important therapeutic problems and diseases that we face. I think that's something that we can all get really excited about. Equally, there are other applications using machine learning that may actually sort of fundamentally decrease our quality of life. And so we're going to see how these get rolled out across different domains. And I think on the one hand, there's a lot of cause for excitement. But on the other hand, these are powerful technologies and they need to be handled carefully.
You mentioned protein engineering. Clearly, it relies on human input both at the beginning and the end of that equation. Is that a limitation in itself, or is that not a problem?
Yeah, that's a really interesting question, an interesting way to look at it. I mean, I think as humans, we want to set up the problem. We want to ask the question and then have the machine learning system answer it. And so in the case of LabGenius, the question that we'll ask the system is we'll say, here's a healthy cell, here's a disease cell. Please, can we have a molecule that can tell the difference between the two of them? And in that case, that's when the robots start making the molecules and testing them in the disease-relevant cell-based assays and learning how best to differentiate them. And I think it really comes down to what's the level of abstraction at which you want to ask that question. So for us, we have to form these kind of quite tightly defined questions, and we've had to invest millions of pounds to build out a platform that's able to ask it. I think for us, that's certainly our approach.
We earlier talked about the fact that you'd got a major investment into the company. As far as investors are concerned, are they up to speed on the potential for AI in medicine?
It varies a lot by investor, and I'm not going to sort of name any names. But what I would say is that obviously, if you're a venture fund, you're looking for a big return. And so you have to have a big appetite for risk. And there are venture funds who are moving into the space who are saying, yep, I believe all of these companies have the potential to be billion-dollar companies. I'm really excited about how they're applying the machine learning. But intrinsically, they know that in some of the frothier areas, there are significant questions around the go-to-market strategy, etc. And this is what gets really, really interesting on the investment front when you're looking at different technologies, approaches, companies, etc., which is there is risk not only on the technical implementation side, but around fundamentally, what is the go-to-market strategy? You may be able to build the technology, but is anyone actually going to ever buy the solution that you're creating there? And of course, some investors are taking more risk than others when they start coupling together those risks. The thing that we're most excited about, and the thing that our investors got really excited about for our £35 million financing, was around a deep understanding of the very specific problem that we're trying to tackle within the context of antibody engineering. So folks like LG Group and Merck, they have their in-house teams who are really grappling with this on the day-to-day basis. They feel the pain and can see the opportunity that this approach can offer. And that's what got them so excited by the investment.
Where do you think that the most important contributions AI can make are with drug discovery? Is it the actual drug discovery? Is it cost savings or speeding things up, or maybe even a combination of all those?
Yeah, I think what's so exciting to me is that you can look at this drug discovery, development, etc., this process that takes many, many years and involves many, many discrete steps. And I think it's fair to say there's no single application of machine learning and AI that's going to solve the whole thing. But what is exciting is that you can slice up every part of that process and you can ask yourself, how can technology, be it machine learning or some other method, better equip drug developers, drug hunters, etc., to really maximize their probability of success and the speed at which they can move. And I'm seeing that at every stage of the process. Now, the challenge, of course, if you want to go really deep on an individual slice of that, is you have to find some way to commercialize that technology. And we see lots of different biotech companies grappling with these sort of business models. Or on the other hand, you see pharma companies often saying, you know what, we're going to develop bespoke solutions for each of those individual steps. But I see, machine learning, AI disrupting several of the steps in that process. And cumulatively, all of those innovations are really going to drive the probability of success up and hopefully the time to discover new molecules down.
Are there any aspects to AI or machine learning that you think are entirely hype when it comes to drug discovery in medicine?
Absolutely, yeah. It's often the case that folks are just looking at the machine learning approach or like LLMs, et cetera, and saying, okay, this is now a solved problem. I think more often than not, the biggest problem is the availability of the underlying data. And I think the reason for that is for some of the most interesting biological questions that we're trying to grapple with, the data just doesn't exist yet. And that's where it's an oversimplification to say this is a problem that's going to be solved by AI or ML. Actually, the problem is going to be solved by a combination of data generation platforms that can conduct high throughput experiments paired with the requisite capabilities around data storage, data management, pre-processing, analysis, integration, etc. And it's only at the confluence of all of these different technologies, once you've built up that stack and that ability to generate high quality data quickly, you can then layer on the machine learning to answer the question. So I think that is probably an area where machine learning is overhyped, seeing it as a silver bullet to solve these problems.
When it comes to the work that you're doing, is it to develop a portfolio that you can take into clinical trials, or is it more selling those multi-specific antibodies on to companies for them to do their trials?
Yeah, we actually, on the commercial side, we want to take as little risk as possible. So we look like a regular biotech company in the sense that we have a hybrid business model that involves investing behind our own pipeline of molecules and partnering with others. And again, I think that's really important for us, because when I look at the company and I think about the risks that we're taking on a tremendous amount of technical risk in terms of the approach that we're taking. We definitely don't want to couple that to commercial risk in the sense of trying to pioneer a new business model. And I think the combination of partnering and progressing a pipeline makes a lot of sense from the perspective that you invest behind your lead molecule, you can prove out your platform and your approach as that molecule and the follow-on molecules after it get more progressed. And at the same time, you have the opportunity to work with partners on the problems that they're finding challenging too.
And clearly diversification is better than so-called all of your eggs in one basket, I guess.
Yeah, and I think there's a capacity piece as well, which is if you've invested a lot into an underlying platform, you have to be able to run programs through it in order to extract value from it. And so there becomes an important capacity consideration there as well.
Do pharma and biotech companies need a plan when it comes to incorporating AI into their work? Because I think that, again, there's that amorphous AI discussion. We need AI, but how do you go about it? And do you have to structure it properly?
Yeah, I think, what's interesting here is for biotech and pharma companies, clearly there are all these C-level conversations where either through their investors or driven internally, they all say, right, we need an AI strategy. Where I've seen companies be most successful in this space is when they approach this more from the perspective of what is the company's greatest constraint? Where are our pain points? And then to what extent can machine learning or AI actually be applied to help us solve these in maybe ways that are completely orthogonal to ways we would have looked at the problem without these methodologies. So I think that's really one thing to say. Otherwise, you end up looking for all of these kind of quite bizarre ways to layer in tools that may not add value. Where I think companies can be really thoughtful, and you have to be sort of thoughtful in a very much like a preemptive way around this, is to think about where are they generating data? How is that data stored? And is it machine learning grade? Because it's often the case that we'll speak to the machine learning team in a pharma company, and they'll turn around and say to us, someone at my company I hear from them all the time that we're sitting on mountains and mountains of data, but you and I both know that we cannot use that data because either of the way in which it was collected or the way in which it was stored, etc. And so being able to collect and store data with machine learning in mind, that is something that everybody should be doing. Now, in the context of the work that we do at LabGenius, that's actually pretty challenging because, again, we're looking at these complex molecules and expecting them to work in these complex disease-relevant cell-based assays. And when you're looking into such biologically rich systems, you find that there's a lot of variability on a day-to-day or week-to-week basis. So the number of controls that you have to integrate ends up meaning that you pretty much refactor the underlying molecular biology workflows to actually collect fundamentally different types of data in order to then ensure that it's compatible with the application of machine learning down the line. So really, I think companies do have to be quite thoughtful around how they generate and store data. Those discussions themselves can really be quite interesting in the sense that certainly at LabGenius, they've had to be generated not by an individual functional team, but by a close collaboration of data scientists, wet lab biologists, automation engineers, etc. And it's only when you can bring in the disparate knowledge and expertise from those different functional teams that you can really think strategically and with sufficient nuance to actually come up with a coherent strategy.
I guess that with the complexity of biology, it doesn't mean that just because you generate an answer or a potential solution that is actually going to work.
Yeah, completely. And I think the other side of this is sort of thinking around like exactly what kind of data gets collected, because historically, when you run these processes, a molecular biology workflow on a screening regime, you may only actually save the top 1% of candidates because you think, hey, I've found these molecules. But actually, if you're thinking about this through the lens of machine learning, the other thing that becomes equally important is you also want to know about all of the molecules that did fairly well and also rather badly, because that's all valuable information that you can carry forward.
And as far as adopting AI is concerned, and you mentioned about companies incorporating AI into their own workflows and their own processes, is there something to be said for potentially outsourcing that or getting help to do that, getting companies to come in, external companies like yours to come in and manage it for them?
I would certainly say that, when we speak to big pharma companies, they are taking AI and machine learning incredibly seriously. They all now have pretty much built out quite extensive in-house teams that allow them to not only understand this, but also integrate it into the day-to-day working. And that's where I think that is the right approach to take, because it's not really something that you can layer on top of an existing workflow. It really has to deeply be integrated into the day-to-day working and decision-making of the business. So I guess the question that arises from that is, what is the best way in which big companies can work with smaller companies where they have built out specific solutions? And that's where I think either really, really kind of clear handoff points become important, or like very thoughtful integration. And so in the case for LabGenius, we will speak to a pharma or biotech company in exactly the same way that you would find in a traditional BD interaction. The conversation will really focus around, what is that molecule that you're looking to deliver? What's the molecular product profile of that? And then we'll use our platform internally to generate such a molecule, at which point the handoff point becomes post-discovery. And so using that kind of tried and tested way of working, we're able to directly plug into the existing ways of working for biotech and pharma companies, as well as obviously progress our own pipeline of molecules. And again, I think that becomes really important, because as a small business, you don't want to be taking risk both on the commercial model side as well as the technical side simultaneously.
And does that extend to investors as well? Do they kind of need guidance in where to invest when it comes to AI in medicine?
I think one thing that's interesting in today's market is obviously there was a kind of 2020, 2021, low interest rates, a huge amount of investment going into deep tech companies. Now it's sort of, post 2023, 2024, investment is much harder to come by. Investors have maybe been burnt a couple of times. And so what we're left with, I think, is a group of really smart, experienced investors who really can discern where the real opportunity sits and make some very smart bets. As I say, as an investor, what you really care about is returning the fund. So at the time of investment, quite a lot of the bets they're making, they do look like high risk investments. Maybe the company is taking on a lot of commercial risk simultaneously with technical risk. And you look at it and you think, yeah, I can see how the technology works, but I just can't see how they're going to monetize that. But, I think inherent in the VC model is that they have to take these big swings in order to return the funds. And sometimes it's only retrospectively, when you look at these companies, you can actually say, that was quite non-intuitive, and they made a smart bet.
I know it's difficult to predict, but how do you see the future of AI in medicine and its evolution and also its success, I guess?
Yeah, so I would always come down to looking at this less from a kind of technology perspective and more from what are the real problems that are plaguing the industry today. And certainly, I think the big opportunity that we see in the antibody engineering space is, I think people will 10, 20 years ahead look back now and say, they were just in the early innings of antibody discovery with respect to the complexity of the molecules that they could produce. When we're a couple of decades ahead and people are routinely binding to and agonizing and antagonizing simultaneously, 5, 10 different pathways with really complex multi-specifics, and being able to kind of leverage and orchestrate really complex biology off the back of that, those molecules will have only been made possible through the application of some of these technologies like high throughput automation combined with machine learning.
And as far as your own company's concerned, what's in the short term and also medium term for your own portfolios?
So for the work at LabGenius, there are a few different vectors of progress that we kind of pay quite a lot of attention to. As I mentioned, we're using machine learning, and specifically a type of machine learning called active learning, in order to optimize these therapeutic antibodies. And what really counts there is the throughput, so the number of variants that you can test per unit time, the quality of the data, and the speed at which you can generate that data as well. And so when we're working and iterating on the platform, we can currently take 768 antibodies round that cycle of designing them, building them, testing them in these disease-relevant cell-based assays, and then learning from the data. We do that all in 6 weeks, which is world-leading, but we'll take that to 1,300 molecules by the end of the year. And what's important there is that ability to generate more data will again open up a lot of opportunities around the air design spaces that we're able to explore. And with the ability to explore larger design spaces, we can start ratcheting up the complexity of these multi-specifics that we're looking at. So we're already seeing really exquisite selectivity. So where we're engineering these molecules to improve their on-target off-tumor tox profiles. But how do we co-optimize those molecules with a bunch of other properties simultaneously? So I'm really excited about the next kind of 18, 24 months. And yeah, hopefully we'll be having another conversation down the road and I can update you on our progress.
AI and machine learning are certainly contributing to the development of drugs, but clearly there are limitations that need to be addressed. Thought-provoking information there from LabGenius. Don't forget to check out the latest news and articles over at Labiotech.eu, and I hope wherever in the world you have a great week ahead. Thanks for listening, and I hope you'll join us next time for another Beyond Biotech.